All right, thank you, everybody. For our final speaker of the day, we have Ianson, the Deputy Director of Planetary Science, the Director for the Mars Exploration Program. He's also had a number of other offices at NASA as well as the DoD, and he's going to be talking about draft plan for a sustainable future for science at Mars. So, Eric, are you there? Some water as well.
Great, thanks so much. Hi there. Thanks so much for being here in this last presentation of the day. The theme of this has been humans to Mars, and I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different, the robotics program for NASA to go to Mars. But I think you're going to find that there are significant relations between the robotic activity and human activity. So I normally do this presentation in about an hour, but I've got 40 minutes, so I'm going to try and see if I can get it done in 30 and leave some time for questions. So just to provide a little bit of program context, over the last 2 decades, NASA's Mars Exploration Program has been making progressive steps to better understand Mars and search for past and present life at Mars with a series of orbiters, landers, and rovers. Those are some of our greatest hits up there. This critical chapter in Mars exploration is going to culminate with the return of samples to Earth through the Mars Sample Return Campaign. But we're at this really interesting inflection point in which the Mars Exploration Program needs to adapt to the changing space business environment. We're seeing more roles for the international community, expanding commercial interest and capability. And we also have to address critical and aging infrastructure at Mars and prepare for a human presence as well. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. This is our fleet chart, but you can see the themes across the bottom. We've followed the water, we've explored habitability, we're seeking signs of life, and throughout that entire time, we're always preparing for humans at Mars. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over this, but we've had great accomplishments with our robotic missions in all different science areas, as well as really proving technologies to be able to explore Mars. And the Mars Sample Return Campaign really is this culmination, as I mentioned earlier, and it's actually managed as a separate program within NASA headquarters, but the Mars Exploration Program and the Mars Sample Return Campaign are actually working really closely together. And in fact, the two ends of that campaign are actually managed by the Mars Exploration Program. One is we're collecting the samples with the Mars Perseverance rover, and then we're going to curate the samples once they come back to Earth. And while we're doing this incredible decadal class science, we really want to try and pivot to a new way of doing things as far as sending lower cost, high science value missions to Mars at a higher frequency. So why are we coming up with this new plan for what we're going to do at Mars? Well, 2 places. The Decadal Survey asked us to put together a comprehensive architecture of missions, partnerships, and technologies. Similarly, we had what's called a program implementation review, which is sort of like the equivalent of like a PDR or CDR for a program. It had a very similar guidance that it provided us to put together a mix of small, medium, large missions, increase competition, and making sure we have broad community participation. So those two fed together to drive us towards developing this new plan for the future. So let me provide a little bit of context to what you're going to see throughout this presentation. This is actually a draft plan. And what we're looking for is input from stakeholders. We've briefed this at several forums already and have received quite a bit of feedback on the plan. So we are looking to modify it, but I'm going to show it to you in its initial draft form. And while this is a Science Mission Directorate plan at NASA headquarters, it really requires close coordination with the other mission directorates, including those focused on human spaceflight. Mars sample return remains the top priority for exploring Mars, but it will really provide this foundational science, and it's going to inform a lot of what we want to do into the future. So a couple of things I wanted to note here before going forward. The first is that this is not included with the plan that you're going to see here is not included in the current Mars Exploration Program budget. So any budget and schedule information you see here should be considered notional. But our plan here is to get feedback on the approach that we want to take and then use this as a mechanism to say, hey, this is what we would like to do going into the future. Okay, so just kind of an executive summary. The first is that we've looked at the key science areas that we want to go after, and I'll touch on these very briefly again in the interest of time. The first is to explore the potential for Martian life. The second is to support human exploration of Mars, and then the third is what we're calling Discover a Dynamic Mars, and it's kind of an umbrella that covers everything else, but in particular looking at Mars as a system and using it for comparative planetology. And the approach that we're taking is trying to take advantage of this new era that we're in. We want to expand opportunity through small, frequent, low-cost missions that can still produce impactful science. We want to build, strengthen, and maintain our critical infrastructure. We want to reduce the cost of access to Mars through partnerships and taking advantage of the low-cost launch vehicle providers, and as well as new delivery systems. We want to develop new technologies that can enable our exploration of Mars, and we also want to make Mars more accessible and inclusive to a broader community. So this is the outline of what you're going to hear. I'll talk briefly about inputs, a little bit about the science themes, talk about the specific initiatives, and then what an aspirational timeline might look like for this. So I talked about the decadal survey, and that certainly is a big input to this plan. But we've also looked at several other things. We've had a couple of studies that have looked at what kind of science can we be doing and how should we be approaching it, and that resulted in a focus more on low-cost missions. We've also had studies that have looked at accessing the Martian surface. We held a low-cost Mars workshop, and we had incredible participation from that and really had lots of great ideas of things that could be done at a much lower cost level than we typically would do at NASA. We've had an industry day and also follow-on site visits, and again, it emphasizes that there's really interest among the broader commercial sector to participate in Mars. And the International Mars Ice Mapper project, we had a mission definition team which really looked at, or a measurement definition team rather, which looked at ice, the importance of ice, and validated the importance of that going into the future, not only for science, but also for reconnaissance, and also emphasized the importance of high-resolution imaging. And then we have several human exploration initiatives that also feed into this as well, all of the Moon to Mars objectives and recurring tenets, and we want to build on these initiatives, the things that we're doing with CLIPS and COTS, and all of the Artemis activities that are happening. So we think there are complementary things that could be done. So let me talk briefly about the science team. So I said there are three basic areas, and I'm probably going to spend most of my time here and not dig too deeply into these. I may touch a little bit on the support for human exploration of Mars, but in a little more detail. So the first element is continuing our exploration for the potential for Martian life. So, there's evidence that Mars could have been a place that could have supported life in the past, and we're trying to continue to look for evidence of that, but also the potential that maybe there's still life there. So we want to continue to do that in the missions that we are doing going forward, and also ensure that we're protecting both Mars when we go there and Earth when we bring things back. The second is supporting human exploration of Mars, and what we want to do is make observations before humans get there that support exploration, for example, looking at ice, or ensuring that we have the capability to be able to support landing sites and really ensuring that there is a good plan for how we're going to do science into the future. And then also, what kind of science can we do at the same time? So humans and robots working together, how does that work in order to be able to get us improved science into the future? And then the last is this Discover Dynamic Mars category, which again is this all-encompassing theme of looking at Mars as a system. So I won't talk a whole lot here. In fact, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this, but this science theme, again, is very big on the entering into the potential for Martian life, but also focused on planetary protection as well. So the second theme, I will touch on this a little bit more, and what we want to do, I'll touch on these just at the topic level here. We want to define the priority for human-led science at Mars. Once humans get there, what kind of science should they be doing? The second is characterizing the potential for ice-rich sites. So really ensuring that there are places that are good sites for humans to arrive at. The third is studying atmospheric science and weather for human needs. This is certainly scientifically interesting, but when humans are there, it's going to be really important that they understand what's going on in the atmosphere, and particularly related to weather. And then a couple of areas that are more perhaps in the ESDMD realm, but we're in a supportive or collaborating role. One is understanding the potential health and safety hazards for humans, and then the second is constructing analog missions to prepare for expeditions to Mars. The third science theme, again, is this Discover Dynamic Mars. Again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. It's really just looking at all the different aspects of Mars, similar to what we do on Earth. Earth is very much a system that has different components, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and similarly at Mars, we want to make sure that we understand how that planet operates as a whole. And then look at what we can do to understand the past of the planet, what that tells us about Earth, and be able to do comparative planetology for other potential Goldilocks worlds. And I should mention, just going back really quickly, especially in the area of supporting human exploration Mars, this is something that we're going to be working with the other mission directorates. This is not only an SMD role. And let me move on. So let me talk specifically about the initiatives that we're planning to implement. One is to expand opportunities to explore Mars through low-cost, competed, more frequent flight opportunities. When you think about robotic exploration at Mars that NASA has done, it's always been very large missions, taking a long time scale in order to be able to develop them and get them to Mars. Here we're talking about the potential of doing things much more rapidly, and again, I'll talk about it in more detail. The second is strengthening and broadening our infrastructure at Mars to enable a more diverse set of missions and looking for new opportunities for partnership. In particular, areas that we are concerned about are our aging communications relay infrastructure, as well as our high-resolution imaging. Both of those are fairly brittle, and they are places that we need to beef up into the future, not only for our future robotic missions, but also when humans get there. The third is to invest in key technologies so that we can expand our understanding of the planet. And then the third is a diversity and inclusion initiative, and this is to enable participation in Mars for all communities. So let me walk through each of these. So the first is, again, this notion of flying more frequently to Mars. And what we're talking about is the potential. There are three categories here, and I'll go through each of them. The first are what we're considering our low-cost competed missions. So these are missions perhaps at the $100, $200, or $300 million level. And we would look to select missions for every launch opportunities. As you know, launch opportunities come around about every 2 years. So what we want to try and do is ensure that we have that we're able to fly every opportunity that we can. These would be competed missions with an announcement of opportunity, and we have the potential where we could select multiple for each opportunity. So let's say we had $300 million available for us to fly in one launch window. Well, you can select one mission at $300 million, three at $100 million, or one at 100 and one at 200. So that provides a lot of opportunity for creative solutions to exploring Mars. And this will certainly draw on our experience from NASA's COTS and CLIPS programs. The second are medium-class missions. The Decadal Survey specifically identified something called the Mars Life Explorer mission, which is a medium-class. And when we talk about medium-class, we're talking New Frontiers class, so in the under $2 billion range. And this is strategic decadal class science, much more complex instrument suites, and new technologies being used for acquisition, mobility, autonomy. This potentially could be competed either at the mission level, like we do with New Frontiers, or it could be competed at the instrument level. So similar to what we've done with many of our Mars missions, where we direct the primary mission and then compete the instruments. And this could be scalable to Discovery. So when I say it's under $2 billion, well, it could be significantly under $2 billion. It kind of depends on specifically what it is that we're looking to do. And then the third category are competed payloads. And in this case, these are missions of opportunity. If someone is going to Mars, hey, maybe we can fly a payload with them, whether that is an international partner, a commercial partner. If you're headed to Mars, give me a call. Let's talk about it and figure out a way that we can try and work together, and maybe we can place a payload on there and take advantage of those opportunities. Similarly, we hope that when we're going to Mars, that we can offer opportunities for others to be able to fly with us. So the second initiative is this strengthening and broadening our infrastructure. So there are several items here, and this is a semi-prioritized list in two different buckets. So one of them is what we're calling science and mission enabling, and then the other is related to access to Mars. So this first group, again, semi-prioritized. I think our number one priority is helping our Mars telecom infrastructure. So our assets are aging there, and if we lose one or two of those, it's going to make things even harder to be able to relay information from the surface. The second is high-resolution imaging. Our primary mechanism for getting that is the high-rise camera on MRO. And again, another aging spacecraft. If we were to lose that, that would be a capability that we would lose. To this point, we've only mapped 4% of the Martian surface at high resolution, so there's a whole lot more that can be done there. Other areas, and I won't go into these in great detail, are global meteorological monitoring, sample handling and receiving. Sample handling and receiving could be either at Earth or in situ at Mars. And then we have our ground receiving networks that we want to make sure are robust, as well as our data infrastructure and visualization activities that happen here on Earth. And so the second category are what we're calling access to Mars. So this is spacecraft delivery. So one of the concepts that we've been exploring is the potential for a tug that could take you from low Earth orbit over to Mars. And also payload hosting opportunities. Again, if someone's going to Mars, I think this is a great opportunity to try and take advantage of that. Similarly, we would like to host others. And one thing that I should mention regarding especially the science and mission enabling aspect, we really want to consider the opportunity to buy commercial services to address infrastructure. Traditionally, NASA has been in the position of building spacecraft and the instruments and using that as our telecommunications network or our imaging. But perhaps similar to what happens on Earth to some degree is we can have somebody else fly there, and instead of us paying for the spacecraft, we're actually paying for the data. And there's potential for a win-win opportunity there. And one of the things I wanted to point out related to infrastructure is that certainly we are the main players in town as well as our international partners. But as we head into human exploration, there's going to be a greater need for ensuring that our infrastructure at Mars is robust. So as we're looking at our potential things that we want to do on the Science Mission Directorate side, We want to work with our partners in ESDMD and STMD and SOMD to ensure that we're aligned in our thinking. So the third is investing in key technologies to enable expanded access to Mars and understand it from a scientific basis. So again, this is a semi-prioritized list here. One of the things is entry, descent, and orbit to land on the surface. One of the things that we've actually been investing in already is the potential for hard landers, such that you would not have to have an elaborate landing system work. And we're doing some testing on this. So interesting idea. Second is aerial mobility. I think everyone's familiar with the Ingenuity helicopter, but there's the potential for continued aerial mobility and looking at expanding that capability. The other potential is surface mobility. Obviously, we've done rovers a lot, but maybe there's a potential for other ways that we can access different parts of the surface. We're seeing great advances in robotics on Earth. Maybe we can continue to leverage that in order to be able to access caves or climb certain mountains that are inaccessible by a rover. And also continue to improve on our autonomy that we've already been doing. Revolutionary subsurface access, being able to dig down hundreds of meters. So this is a drilling capability. We think this is a really important aspect to be able to understand what's in the subsurface, such that is a potential for human resources in the future. And then we have others, and I'll just touch on these very quickly. In situ handling of samples, continued investment in remote sensing capabilities, especially those related to life measurements, and then other telecommunications or direct-to-orbit capabilities. And this is a place that we certainly would work with the Space Technologies Mission Directorate at NASA in order to ensure that we're aligned in what our thinking is as far as technology priorities. And then the last one here, and I'll touch on this very briefly, is enabling a broader participation in Mars. What we want to try and do is increase our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility elements of our program. Really establish clear plans, make sure that we are being inclusive with our community, working with institutions that traditionally have not had a role, and making it a much more inviting place for people to say, hey, I can participate in Mars as well. So I won't go into this in any great detail because I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions. So I mentioned at the top that we currently are not funded to implement this plan as it's presented here today. But there are some precursor activities that we think we can do in the near term. One that we're actively doing already is to explore opportunities for commercial services to address infrastructure needs. The second is we're working towards awarding some study contracts to industry to better define the potential for public-private partnerships. Traditionally, our mode has been, release an RFI and then release an RFP. And what we're thinking about doing here is just awarding these study contracts to say, hey, look, we're really serious about this. We want to understand how better to partner with industry. Next is engaging with our international community on potential partnerships and hosting opportunities. This is something that we have done throughout the Mars exploration program, but again, really important that we continue to work with our international partners. There is a draft study that we're working on to our draft statement of work that we're working on to have a study done by the national academies specifically looking at science objectives for humans at Mars. So, we have some very high-level objectives. This is digging down one level below that. The next is to invest in technologies to expand access to Mars. So technology investments are relatively low cost, and we think that we can continue to do that. I talked about announcements of opportunity. Well, it takes a while to actually develop announcements of opportunity. So rather than waiting until we have all the funding lined up to be able to implement one, we can put together a draft and start working with the community and ensure that we're ready, such that when funding does become available, we can hit the ground running and get an announcement of opportunity out and hit that next launch window. And then the last is related to our DEIA initiative, is initiate work to really enable broader participation in the Mars community. So when can we actually do this? So we laid out, a lot of a very ambitious program here. So when could we do this? So you see in the dotted box there, that's the approximate timeline for humans being at Mars, and you see along the top we have Mars sample return and what its schedule is. Realistically, we're probably looking at the potential for maybe something in the early 2030s as when we could do our first low-cost mission. But we also want to look at the potential for partnership opportunities. So you see along the bottom, we show some of the potential international missions, and there may be opportunities for missions of opportunity to work with them. And we also want to continue to invest in our technologies. So this is a hypothetical timeline, but the key is it's flexible. And in fact, what I wanted to show you here is this is a notional sand chart or a approximate sand chart. So don't pay too close of attention to the actual numbers. There are no numbers on here as far as how high they are, but it gives you a sense of traditionally the way we have worked things at NASA is we've had these big peaks and valleys. So you have missions in development that are costing a lot of money, and then we go into operations, then it takes a while to ramp up the next mission. While it has resulted in incredible missions, it also is very challenging on the budget and creates all sorts of problems as we're trying to implement the rest of our program, keep our operational missions going. So it is really challenging to work in that peaks and valley type of environment. So if you look into the future, what this lower cost approach provides us the opportunity to do is to develop a sustained budget. So whatever the number is, I'm not going to throw out a number here for what it could be, but we have the flexibility to be able to build our program to a budget level as opposed to saying, well, this is how much we need, and if we overrun, it's this much. Well, in this case, if we overrun, then we just shift around what our priorities are for the next low-cost launch or whatever. So just to summarize before we have a few minutes for questions, prior to the launch of Mars Sample Return, our priorities are to achieve the objectives of our program of record. So this is all of our operating missions that we're working with, as well as initiating the development of the sample receiving project. So this is the tail end after the samples come back, how we're going to manage them here at Earth. The second is to collaborate with ESA on the ExoMars Rosalind Franklin mission. So we are working very closely with them. There was funding in the President's budget request, so we're really excited to be able to work with our partners at ESA on that. The third is to seek low-cost opportunities to address critical infrastructure. So we're keeping our eyes out for how we can do this and try and work within our existing budget to be able to address particularly our areas of concern in communications, relay, and high-resolution imaging. The fourth item here is to continue investments in our key technologies, and then the last is to develop public-private partnership arrangements, reinforce our existing international partnerships, and explore new opportunities with established and emerging space organizations. After the launch of MSR, we think we can implement this sustainable portfolio of low-cost competed missions, medium-class missions, infrastructure and technology investments, and missions of opportunity. The content and schedule are variables to be managed against that sustained budget level and maximize our science return. And the focus now is going to, or heading into the future, if this plan is implemented, will be to focus on smaller, low-cost missions, partnerships, missions of opportunity, and allow us to be more agile and responsive to discoveries. And we want to implement science that is supportive of and synergistic with humans at Mars. And with that, here's an email address that we have that allows for feedback to come. So if you've seen stuff that you liked here, let us know. If there's things that you think we could be doing better, let us know. So we're really interested in feedback on this draft plan as we try and finalize it later this year. So with that, I'm open to take questions. It's getting late. People are hungry, tired. It's probably happy hour.
I'll ask a question.
Okay. Yep.
I do have a question. I was wondering if you could point to any systems or processes that you think could be changed in order to make NASA and the United States a better partner for international collaboration with our allies.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think anytime you enter into a partnership, the most important thing is reliability and being able to count on your partner to deliver on what they're committed to. And I think that the biggest thing that one of the things I think that is helpful in this plan is having those lower cost objectives. As you know, when we have big missions, they tend to overrun because we're doing things that have not been done before. They're really challenging, and it really places a strain on the budget. And we try to meet our commitments with our international partners whenever possible. In fact, it's one of our highest priorities. But I think as we work with large missions, it sometimes can be hard. And I think shifting to a more agile approach, I think provides us a little more flexibility in order to be able to meet those commitments.
Got time for one more?
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
So hi, I don't think we've met. I'm Danette Allen. I'm the Senior Leader for Autonomous Systems at NASA.
Hi, Danette.
Hi. Work primarily with STMD, but working across all the mission directorates. And we had three of the deputy directors here this morning, and they were talking about collaboration and how they work together. I was wondering if you could tell us how you expect the Exploration Office to work with the mission directorates, because you're talking about robotics. It seems like everyone has robotics needs, and how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so there's an organization at NASA called the Federated Board that has representation from each of the mission directorates as well as other offices. And that certainly has been a mechanism that has driven a lot of what's happening on Moon to Mars and Artemis. And we actually did bring this presentation, an earlier version of this presentation, before the Federated Board to get some feedback, as well as we worked with each of the individual mission directorates as well and got some great feedback from them. In fact, I think this is a much better product for doing it. And I think as we go forward, I pointed out some of the areas where I think there really is an opportunity to collaborate and make sure that we aren't moving in one direction and the other mission directorates are moving in a different direction. And one of those is we definitely want to collaborate on our science objectives and ensure that they are working not only for what our science objectives are, but also how does it best support human exploration, especially that second science theme. And then the other place that I see a lot of opportunity, or a couple places I see a great opportunity for collaboration, is working on the infrastructure piece. There's going to be a need not only on the robotic side, but also on the human side to ensure that we've got the right infrastructure in place. And that is a really cross-directorate objective. Space technology has to do its space operations, which does a lot of our major communications activities. They're going to have to be involved in it. And certainly ESDMD, the Exploration Directorate, is going to have have lots of interest in the things that we want to do. So I think that's a great place that we can really work together and collaborate. And then also in the area, specifically in STMD, collaborating on the potential future technologies. Certainly the list of technologies that are interesting to all of us in the different directorates is very long, and the budget is not quite as long as that. So trying to find ways to prioritize those, I think, is really important. And Carolyn Mercer in SMD works really closely with the Space Technology Mission Directorate, and it really provides a great opportunity for us to be able to talk about what our priorities are, and hopefully that helps influence that directorate. Any other questions? Maybe?
So
So I haven't heard this be talked about that much, but in a lot of the science that we're doing, it's great science, but to prepare us for actually getting humans on Mars, we need to find a landing site. So are any of these scientific missions, do any of their objectives include navigating to find a landing site and provide some of that feedback?
Well, one of the projects that I think is going to be instrumental there is NASA is currently not an active participant in it, but we're actually continuing to talk with the international partners on the International Ice Mapper mission. So I think that's a great opportunity for the potential to map ice locations for human exploration. So that's OSSI, JAXA, and CSA are working together on that, and we're continuing to explore the potential for our participation in that as well. But I think a key thing, I mentioned high-resolution imaging, and I think that is really going to be important. I'm very concerned that if we lose the high-rise camera on MRO, that really can provide a big impact to our ability to map the surface, and especially in the case of looking for locations for humans. So I think the potential for continued high-resolution imaging, and if we can figure out a way to do it with commercial partners where they're, putting out a constellation of imagers and then selling the data back to us, I think that would be a great way to be able to try and approach the problem. But I agree with you that's a great place to go. So there's science that we can get from high-resolution imaging, but it's really also important in the future for humans. Question?
Hi. Can you speak to risk assessment and mitigation in terms of the public-private partnership? And as you're developing such a broad and in-depth mission scope and logistical timeline, there's a lot that could be dependent and probably will be dependent on other people doing their part, and they may or may not achieve their objectives within their own timelines, let alone your timeline. And how do you manage, or how do you propose to manage that?
Well, can you repeat the second part, just to make sure I understand that clearly, what you were asking there?
How do you propose to manage the public-private partnership in terms of people meeting their deadlines that are mission critical for you, or not meeting them and sliding as people are needing to develop technology on both sides of this?
Sure. I think, for one thing, throughout this entire draft approach that we're talking about here, I think there's a greater risk tolerance that we're taking. By shifting to smaller, low-cost missions that are flying more frequently, I think it provides more opportunity to be able to accept more risk. Whereas if you're flying a mission like Mars Sample Return, you got one shot to do it, right? So it's you want to make sure that you get that right. It's multi-billion dollars invested in that. Whereas here you have a lot more risk tolerance that you can accept. And I think that's true in the potential for public-private partnerships as well. Especially if we're casting a broad net and trying to work with different companies on different approaches. If they don't all work, that's probably okay, because if we get some of them that work, the payoff can be really high. So I think that's what we're trying to approach here throughout this, both in the public-private partnerships, in our low-cost missions, and working with international partners, is to ensure that we're getting more shots on goal, to say, more opportunities to be able to get science and deliver the things that we're looking for. And as far as timelines go, again, if we're looking at the potential for going every launch opportunity, and maybe if we have a queue of multiple things in the hopper, and one of them falls behind, well, maybe another one can get into its place, because we're doing so many different things at a more frequent cadence and lower cost. So I think there's lots of potential there, and in talking with the commercial sector, there certainly is no shortage of interest in doing activities at Mars. I have meetings all the time of companies that have got great ideas about how to do it, and we want to try and explore this further and see what we can do. And I think as they become closer to reality, we'll be talking a lot more about the risk posture that we're going to be able to accept for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? 1 minute and 8 seconds left. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you all for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that.